Welcome to the Clear to Send podcast, a podcast about wireless engineering, where we educate you on Wi-Fi technology, talk about design tips, troubleshooting, interviews, and the tools. Here are your hosts, Roel and Francois.
Hey everybody, welcome to a brand new episode of the Clear to Send podcast. My name is Roel Dionisio, your host. Francois is unable to join us today in this episode, but hopefully he will be back soon. Before we get into the main topic today of Wi-Fi 6 or 802.11ax overview, I wanted to ask you guys to leave us a review on iTunes, give us a rating. If you head over to cleartosend.net/iTunes, that will bring you directly to our show page. And if you could just spend a couple of minutes to give us a rating and a review, hopefully that will help other or new listeners see what our show is about, and you get to tell them what it is that you get out of the show, and hopefully we can direct more people to our episodes and have more listeners, and we would greatly appreciate that. Again, that is cleartosend.net/iTunes. So hopefully you guys are staying warm in this winter that the country is seeing. Even here on the West Coast in the Bay Area, we're getting quite the quote-unquote freeze. I think about 35 to 45 degrees Fahrenheit is pretty cold for us Californians. We are actually seeing some snowfall close to the coastal areas, because here in San Jose, the closest mountain that is near me, I'm able to see quite a bit of snow, and that's the first time I've seen that much snow on the mountain nearby. Even on the Santa Cruz Mountains, there's a little bit of snow. And so here I am in my garage just wearing a t-shirt, and I'm actually just a little cold. But hopefully this overview that I'm going to talk about with Wi-Fi 6 or 802.11ax won't take up too much of your time, and hopefully not too much of my time as I try to warm up. And I want to preface this as I've kept my distance away from 802.11ax for quite a bit, even when it was gaining a lot of traction. I wasn't really paying much attention to it because, for one, there was no 802.11ax clients at all out there, and also there weren't any AX APs available to purchase. But that's now changed just a little bit. The landscape's starting to change, and this year we have 802.11ax APs from Aerohive, and also Aruba's probably going to come out with theirs pretty soon, as we have seen some of their demos. And also there's been some announcements of possibly 2 clients, a laptop and also a Samsung phone, coming later this year. And so these are going to support 11ax draft 3.0, I guess. And so I decided, hey, why don't I start looking into 11ax? What is the difference between this version of what we're calling high efficiency or Wi-Fi 6? There's so many different names, and I don't want to get into that too much, but I will use all 3 as much as I can in this episode. But the Wi-Fi Alliance has their certification coming later in 2019 for 802.11ax. So I predict we'll probably see this ratification maybe in early 2020. That's what I'm guessing. A lot of the vendors are probably assuming that's going to come later this year. Part of the CWNA exam, you should also know about 802.11ax. They did, I think that is in some of the textbooks. I don't know if that's in the official certification guide, but I do know it's in the certification guide written by David Coleman and David Westcott. They do go quite into some detail about 802.11ax, and I think it's worth giving a read. I think that's chapter 19 in their book, and I did use that as a reference to go through this overview. And I also referenced the draft document, the 802.11ax draft 3.0 in the form that it is now, the one that I could find. So what I'm going to do here is kind of go over what I think how I can best understand, given the couple of days I've been looking at the 802.11ax draft and hopefully a standard pretty soon. And so kind of think about, how did we get here from the 802.11a and B days where Wi-Fi was just a nice to have, right? It was just coverage based, and then the biggest shift there was when 802.11n came out because of the aggregate channels that it provided more bandwidth and the more devices that came out that supported Wi-Fi, and that's when we really saw Wi-Fi start to take off. But then we were still kind of plagued with these legacy devices that slow down Wi-Fi for all the faster or newer devices. So we have to support these legacy protocols, which I'm referring to 802.11a, B, G, maybe even N at this point. And also devices that are still only single band, right? Your IoT devices, which may only be 2.4 gigahertz. There's a lot of legacy in the way of creating what we're going to call an efficient wireless network. So all these devices and APs are all contending for airtime, which is a precious resource that we have, and maybe it'll be precious until we get more frequency allocation to Wi-Fi, which is a reference to the 6 gigahertz band, but that's still a long ways from now in terms of getting that frequency. So when we talk about Wi-Fi 6, 11ax, I don't know which one to go with yet, but the main 5 features of 11ax that's not in 11ac or 11n. You have mandatory support for downlink and uplink OFDMA. You have also mandatory support for downlink MU-MIMO. And then you have optional support for high efficiency sounding protocol for beamforming. And then there's also optional support for uplink MU-MIMO. And so kind of the differences there, you probably know about MU-MIMO and how we don't know whether or not that's what I think is I don't have a way to actually document that really working. But in 802.11ac, we have this MU-MIMO that was downlink only, but it was an optional support. And so with 11ax, you have the mandatory support for downlink MU-MIMO, but now uplink MU-MIMO is optional. And when we talk about the main MAC features in 11ax, that's not in the previous protocols. You have AP that has that has optional support for what I saw was 2 nav operation. So not just a single nav, but now there's a second nav that the AP can support. On the other side of that, the client has mandatory support for 2 nav operations. So hopefully in a future episode, because what I plan on doing here is in the next couple episodes go into more detail of some of these features. So moving forward with the main Mac features in 11ax, there's mandatory AP support for TWT. And that is target wake time, which I'll go into a little bit later. The client will have optional support for target wake time. So that's something to consider, because I think that's going to be a big power save feature for clients. We will also have optional support for uplink OFDMA based random access, and also optional support for spatial reuse operation. So hopefully I can go into more detail in a future episode. I'm not going to go into super great detail with all of these just yet, because I'm still understanding 802.11ax, and hopefully if you have a lot more knowledge than I do, which I will also share some resources to people who have more knowledge than I do. I just want to share how I was interpreting some of the documentation that I'm seeing, and hopefully we can have a discussion about how we think this is going to work. But obviously we'll really see how this works once clients come out and once this is ratified. So when you compare 11ax to the other protocols like 11ac or even 11n, you have to remember that 11AX, which is high efficiency, it's going to operate in both 2.4 and 5 gigahertz frequency. It can aggregate channels up to 160 megahertz wide. It uses both OFDM and OFDMA, which will be a big topic later. And then the thing to note here is the subcarriers in OFDMA is going to be much smaller. It's going to be at 78.125 megahertz, whereas 11AC, for example, used 312.5 kilohertz of spacing. The guard intervals are different as well. The modulations is going to be more or less the same, but the update with 11AX is you're going to see 1024 QAM, which may be, I guess, difficult to achieve. I guess if you've got an AP right above you and you've got really clean RF environment, that'll be interesting to see whether or not we can actually achieve that. And then you have, in comparison to all the other protocols, you have MU-MIMO on both the downlink and uplink. So I think MU-MIMO should be an episode all to itself, but the gist of it is multi-user MIMO allows multi-user transmissions on different spatial streams. 11AC specified this in the downlink only, which I believe I mentioned previously, but it was optional. And I'm not even sure if I can see this in the real world. I'm not sure how to capture this and visualize it somehow. And if you have that kind of information, or there's some tools that we can try to validate this, let me know in the show notes. So when it comes to different topics I'm going to provide overview on, I'm going to talk about channel access for 11AX, multi-user operation, the subcarriers, something called resource units, and BSS coloring, which is different, and also target wake time. So as we try to talk about some of these topics, and we'll go really brief on these because I do want to go into detail in future episodes, like I said. So this one will be fairly short. This episode will be short. But channel access for 11AX, there you have your high efficiency BSS, which is going to use RTS and CTS, request to send and clear to send, for transmit opportunity. Now these clients, they're going to use we know about RTS and CTS, but they really come into use here with 11AX differently, where the one thing that I did notice in the standard is multi-user RTS and CTS. So the multi-user RTS and CTS lets an AP initiate transmit opportunity. So there is a multi-user RTS trigger frame that will solicit simultaneous CTS responses from multiple 11AX clients. And so that will set this transmit opportunity at a set time for all these transmissions to go through. And so hopefully I can try to include some sort of image that goes over this so you can fully understand. It may be a little bit difficult to grasp that over audio, and I completely understand if you don't know what I mean, but I will try to put a simple graphic together in the show notes. And multi-user operation is, I guess, really big here with 11AX, and that's how we're going to create this efficiency with your wireless network, because the high efficiency 11AX allows simultaneous downlink transmissions from an AP2 client, both in using downlink OFDMA and downlink MU-MIMO. Now, OFDMA is the biggest enhancement, I think, to 11AX, because this creates a multi-user version of OFDM. And it's really interesting because what it'll do is, well, I guess first, don't get confused with OFDMA as being similar to MU-MIMO, because it isn't. This really just applies to OFDM and the channel, because in OFDMA, the channel is subdivided into smaller channels, and we will call those resource units or RUs. On each channel, there can be a different transmission to a different client, hence the multiple access. So the 11AX allows for the uplink multi-user operation by letting the AP solicit these simultaneous responses from one or more 11AX clients. And this, I think, would really benefit a graphic, because if you take the whole OFDM channel, you break that up into smaller channels, because in OFDM, let's go back right before 11AX. In OFDM, you have this single channel, let's say channel 36, and that channel would fill up data for a single client, for example. Now, if you look at 11AX and OFDMA, you're going to take that single channel, you're going to break that up into smaller channels, and then assign what's called resource units to clients. And so like client A can take up a specified number of resource units, and client B can take up a specified number of resource units, and then the AP transmits to those clients. So the subcarriers, specifically, we had 64 subcarriers, 52 of which carried data, and then 4 of which were pilot, and 8 were subcarriers for guard bands. That's OFDM. And so the width of those subcarriers is 312.5 kilohertz. Now in OFDMA, those subcarriers, they're now much smaller. Like I said, 78.125 kilohertz. And for OFDMA, that equates to 256 subcarriers. Now it'll maintain the different types of subcarriers for data, pilot, and guard, etc. But the real difference here is with these resource units. And like I said, prior to 11AX, the AP would transmit or receive across a whole OFDM channel for a single client. And so with OFDMA, we're going to use those little subcarriers, those little resource units that we split up in the OFDM channel. You're going to allocate resource units used for a client or multiple clients, and then the AP would transmit that data. So I believe that resource units is worth going deeper into another episode. So I'll save like any further research for that. I do need to reread again the standard about resource units. It looked like it was identified in different sections of the draft, and I just need to really nail down how it's used, what are the limitations, and then we can go into detail about when do we hit some sort of like limitation in terms of performance, for example. Now the next big change in 11AX is this BSS frame determination. So the 11AX introduces the BSS colors, and it determines if a frame is destined for the same BSS or not. So the color itself is really just a number. It's a digit for identification. And let's say a client is receiving a frame, it will determine if it is part of the BSS. If the BSS color is the same as the BSS the client is joined to. And so if that frame is not the same BSS color as a client, then it is not the same BSS. And so this really brings a new way into handling co-channel interference. And that's where these colors come into play. And so we know that if like an AP is operating on channel 149, here's another AP transmitting on that same channel, it must defer, right? And likewise, if a client is transmitting, say on channel 157, and any other clients or AP operating on that channel, here's that client's transmission, it must defer. So the way that BSS coloring would work is, even though they may be on the same channel, but the BSS color is not the same, it'll just ignore that frame, the frame that it's not the same color. Now, BSS coloring is actually not that new. It was mentioned in 802.11 AH, and so that's going to be a document I'm going to really look through and create another episode that details just BSS coloring and how it works and what we could get out of this, because I'm going to assume there's going to be some sort of limitation as to how many colors you can have, right? Or how many digits. And the first thing that pops into my mind is maybe a very highly dense area, such as an apartment complex. How is that going to affect all the APs on the same channel, and how many colors are going to be affected, right? So you're still going to, I believe, you're still going to reach some sort of co-channel interference there. Now, the next, the big topic with 11AX is target wake time. So this introduction of a new power saving mechanism by scheduling a wake time for clients in power save mode. And the goal of target wake time, TWT, is to optimize how often the client actually needs to wake up to determine if it has data, and it would essentially keep the client asleep longer, thus save more on battery. And there is a target wake time capability that is broadcasted in the high efficiency capabilities element, and an high efficient client, capable client will inherit those target wake time values from that TWT element advertised by the BSS ID, and it will follow the TWT schedule. Interesting that the AP can control when clients may contend for airtime by scheduling when the clients wake up for transmission. So the TWT can be negotiated per client. So there's a number of different types of TWT schedules that can be negotiated, and maybe even a client may not want to join a perform TWT scheduling. So these clients then, if they do follow the schedule, they go into a doze state as per the draft standard, and then they wake up at the next wake up time, and they'll hopefully conserve more battery, because that's a big concern for all mobile users, right? Using Wi-Fi, is they're having to wake up and check whether or not there's buffered data for them. Now, some of the interesting things I may go into in future episodes, like these two Navs thing. A client will need to maintain two Navs, so network allocation vectors. So, and high efficient capable AP has the option of, or not really an option, but it will be able to maintain two Navs. And the Navs are the intra BSS nav and a basic nav. The basic nav is updated by an inter BSS that is not classified as a intra BSS or inter BSS, but this is where I think I need to go into more detail in another episode to describe if I think this feature is going to be used in 11AX with clients. And so the benefits of two Navs may be useful for more dense scenarios, for protection of clients from other frames transmitted by clients within its BSS, and to avoid interference from other clients in neighboring BSS. So I think that's where the two Navs come into play with the BSS coloring. And so at first it looks like 11AX is just really going to be complex. But I think if we try to understand how these different components work together and whether or not they'll be implemented by a lot of the device manufacturers and our wireless vendors, that's a different story. And then we have MU-MIMO. Do we have clients that are even MU-MIMO capable? Maybe not so many, but I think we could dedicate an episode to MU-MIMO just to understand how it actually works. What are the benefits? Are there is it needed because there's a level of lab testing maybe we need to do with capable clients to further understand how MU-MIMO may work in the real world. But 802.11ac did add the downlink MU-MIMO as an option, but now it's mandatory in 11ax, and 11ax adds the optional support for uplink MU-MIMO. So that is my quick overview of what I've been able to grasp around 802.11ax. And so I guess the question is, how should we start planning for 11ax? Should you start planning for it? What should you do now? Maybe you're in your upgrade cycle. So, and from my perspective, having not seen many clients supporting 11ax yet, and also it's not even a standard yet, it's not ratified, I say maybe hold off on upgrading to 11ax capable APs just at this moment, because you want to see how this is going to play out. You want to see devices that are actually supporting the standard, not a draft. Now, we've gone through this before with previous protocols. You could be bleeding edge if you want to and start testing, because we will see Samsung phones coming out later this year that'll support 11ax draft. But I'd say purchase some equipment for your lab testing environment and see what you could expect. Now, we won't be able to fully see the its full potential, because this is high efficiency. So I would expect to test this in an environment that needs that's in a dense environment where we could see more efficiency around how we have wireless transmissions over the air with efficiency with management frames, control frames, co-channel interference. It's still hard to tell. And so some of the resources that I think you guys should read, check out the CWNA study guide, the CyBEC study guide from David Coleman and David Westcott, which is chapter 19, which describes 802.11ax. They also have, or David Coleman has a book out with Aerohive called 802.11ax for Dummies. And then there's also the 802.11ax draft, which you may or may not be able to download if you have a subscription or an account with IEEE that has the permissions to download it. But I will include a link to all three. There are a lot of other resources out there that go into detail, but in the show notes I'll try to add some images to further describe what I'm talking about when it comes to BSS coloring and also channel access with multi-user RTS and CTS. I think that'll be very helpful. So if you guys have any questions or if you guys have any comments, feel free to reach me on Twitter at Clear2Send. You could also leave a comment in the show notes where we can drive further discussion there as well. So there you have it. That is my overview of 802.11ax/Wi-Fi 6. And I hope you guys found that useful, and we hopefully look forward to the future episodes where I go into a little bit more detail. Thanks guys, and I will see you on the next episode.